Is it true that that box of purpose is just automatically checked for all the sailors under your command when you're on a submarine, or is there something more at play here?
You can never communicate too much why we're here and why we're doing what we're doing. And if you're insincere in that communication, then they're going to detect that a mile away. You've got to really understand yourself why we're here, why we're doing what we're doing, and you've got to believe in it. And if you don't, then you probably shouldn't be there. No one ever wants to talk about morality. If I go to a bunch of sailors, a bunch of soldiers, and I say, gentlemen and ladies, I'm here to talk about morality, they're all going to just, their eyes are going to roll. Tell me how to be disciplined. Tell me how to be industrious. Tell me how to be productive. Tell me how to be self-obedient. Isn't it valuable sometimes to be angry? Like, wouldn't that make you better at fighting or better at handling a situation that you should handle appropriately? Like, if someone is threatening my family or someone is threatening my organization, shouldn't I be angry about that? And I would say, absolutely not.
My very special guest is an active military professional with a distinguished career in the U.S. Navy. His service includes duty in nuclear-powered submarines across a variety of classes and mission profiles, including assignments as the weapon officer of a fast attack submarine and the executive officer of a Trident missile submarine. He is Commander William C. Spears. Welcome to the show, Commander.
Hey, Matt, I'm so glad to be here. Hey, before we get going, I do have to say, since I am active military, I'm actively serving today, anything that I do say is just my own opinion. It doesn't represent an official position of the U.S. government or any part of the government. That's all.
Seems 100% fair to me. I'm excited to have our conversation today. We only had a brief minute to catch up, so I'm going to be learning as we have just a quick back and forth, if that makes sense. Well, one of the things is that I find that in my military service, people really take an active interest in that when it comes to leadership principles, et cetera. And while I had the great pleasure to deploy on a couple of different surface platforms from the Navy, I don't know anything about submarines at all. And I know my listeners probably don't either. So maybe you could just help us understand a little bit about, from a leadership context and the situational environment, like what's it like to work and operate and command on a submarine?
So the thing that I think makes it most different from, especially a leadership and organizational standpoint, from any other kind of surface ship or any other military unit, is the degree to which you are cut off. Whenever we submerge the ship, a submarine, all of its military utility is in being hidden and being invisible. And so part of that means that no communications go on or off the ship. I have to correct that a little bit. We can receive, but we can't transmit, or we don't. And that is explicitly to be as hidden and quiet as we can be. And so what that means is that all of your systems and all of your organization is designed such that you're going to operate all this very sensitive and dangerous equipment in a certain way and it's got to be controlled from very far away with a very strict imposition of you're going to do things a certain way. We're very, very procedurally rigorous, very, very focused on what the procedures and what the manuals and the books say. And that shapes all kinds of things from top to bottom throughout our culture and how we operate.
It seems to me that a lot of organizations almost operate like they're self-contained, even though they're part of a broader ecosystem. And I think that in organizations that have like multiple offices or maybe different departments and functions, especially in larger organizations, that can be true too. So I think it's interesting that there's parallels between the isolated nature, the sort of contained nature of the sub. It's like a microcosm of what's going on, but certainly being able to stay hidden and to dip away for weeks and months at a time. That's a little bit unusual for leaders in the civilian sector.
Yeah, and whenever you're dealing with, you got to consider the complexity of the equipment that you're dealing with. I mean, this is very sensitive, dangerous stuff. Nuclear power, very dangerous chemicals, very dangerous weapons, and we're training 18 and 20-year-olds to not just operate it, but to maintain it and repair it from far away. And that there's a lot of training that goes into that, but the way that you design things is very, very sensitive and very complex. Now, what happens whenever I have a piece of equipment that's not behaving the way it's supposed to be, and I have a procedure that doesn't accommodate this situation? And that's kind of where the leadership comes into play, and how we train the culture, or we develop the culture to accommodate this. What you don't want is your individual submarine sailors to say, "Oh, well, this equipment is giving me this indication, but I know what it really means is this, even though the book says this, and so I'm going to just operate it this other way just because I've got the experience to know." How to do it, and we have to say no. That's not how it works. We have to accommodate and adjudicate this at the proper level to place the responsibility where it belongs. Even if my individual technician understands this equipment better than I do as a senior officer, I need him to, basically draft a procedure. Hey, this is what I think the procedure should say, given the conditions that we have right now. And basically we bring that up. We have the different engineers on the ship look at it and say, okay, I agree, I accommodate, and we sign it out and we say, okay, this is your new procedure. This is how you're going to operate. So an example would be, my auxiliary, technician says the oxygen generator, whenever the startup procedure says that at this point in time, this indicator light is supposed to come on. But that light is broken right now and I don't have the part to fix it on board, but I know that I can look at this pressure gauge over here and tell that the indication is that's what that light's supposed to tell me anyway. So I know the equipment well enough to know that this is how I can start it up, and mitigate this material condition. Well, we're going to adjudicate that at the right level and place the responsibility at the commanding officer. So, we understand, top to bottom, what's wrong with the ship, what are any kind of deficiencies, all that stuff is understood and accommodated at every level that's appropriate, but also that we're placing the responsibility for the deviation from procedure at the right level.
It's really amazing. Like, we don't have oxygen generators in our businesses in the civilian world. It sounds important. I haven't been on a submarine. It sounds pretty important. But I think that something that does strike for me is that we try to really have control a lot of times in various parts of our business, whether it's our sales and marketing engine, maybe if we're in a software development firm, the way that we produce defect-free code, whatever it might be. And it doesn't always work out that way. Or sometimes we have the other opposite problem, which is getting individuals to kind of use the systems that we've designed. Both can be bad, right? In the sense that if we're overly rigorous and it doesn't allow for sort of that sort of problem solving, then we're executing a flawed process, and processes need to evolve over time. But other times, we have to use the systems because they were engineered in a certain way, and we won't know if they work, otherwise. But I think you referred to this at one point in our earlier conversation about a zero defect environment. And it sounds really great. I don't know that it always happens, but I wonder if you might just kind of expand a little bit more on this notion of what is a zero defect environment and what are some of the challenges that inherently come along with it, both from a process and technical perspective, but also from a people perspective.
Well, wouldn't that be nice to have a zero defect environment, just to have no problems? We don't ever have any problems here, sir. No, everything is fine. Okay, so usually whenever people say zero defect environment, it's kind of a curse word, because what it turns into is a lot of leadership malfeasance if you're not willing to tolerate any kind of defect, and you just neurotically do crazy things to try to stamp out everything. But and so I will say there is no such thing as a zero defect environment on planet Earth. If I can say that on a nuclear submarine, I think I can say that anywhere. But you definitely have environments and certain systems and processes that have very low tolerance for defect. So my reactor instrumentation, something like that. If I'm dealing with, let's just say, very big dangerous missiles, we're not going to tolerate a lot of defect in how we perform our procedures and how we calibrate these things and how we operate them. So what that lends itself to is we do a lot of self-monitoring. A good example is we'll have processes, and you have this on surface ships too, but we kind of take it into overdrive on submarines, where we will, if we're going to do maintenance on, my sailors, my 20-year-old sailors are going to go do, say, are going to perform maintenance on a radioactive valve. I'm going to have some administrative program that so often whenever they do this maintenance at some periodicity, I'm going to have some supervisor watch them do it and sit there with a clipboard and monitor to make sure that they are following the procedure to a T. and they're going to look for any kind of deviation from procedure and grade them out and all that on how they're doing this routine maintenance. Well, I'm going to accumulate a binder full of these monitor forms. And when an inspection team inevitably comes on my ship, they're going to inspect my monitor programs to make sure that I'm monitoring with rigor. And what that creates is this pressure where whenever they look at this binder, and if they see a whole bunch of evidence of all this internal monitoring of my maintenance, but it doesn't say I don't ever find anything wrong, then they're going to think that I'm not really, either I don't really understand, my supervisors don't really understand how these procedures work, or we're not grading ourselves hard. We don't have teeth in our internal monitoring processes, and we don't have high standards. And so that creates this pressure to just find stuff wrong. So you can see immediately how this can spiral out of control if you don't have, active, leadership impulses to keep it under control. Because one, you've created this burdensome, administrative process where every time I've got a supervisor monitoring routine maintenance that they're not doing something else I could have that supervisor doing. I've got this binder, I've got this paper, I'm killing trees that I'm accumulating. I don't know what value it has necessarily, or some people's involved in this process might not really know what value it has. And now I've got this pressure to just find things wrong. Well, what if the sailors are doing everything right? What if they're very well trained? So then you have got a morale issue over here where it's just like I've got people watching me do my job and not trusting me, and that can create some psychological pressures. And those are all the points where you've got to have the human leader that comes in and says, "Hey guys, this is why we have this program. We have to have it. These are the pressures involved. We all acknowledge it. Okay, let's do the maintenance and let's do it right. Let's go." And that's necessary. So I think something that will be relevant, especially to your listeners, is this phenomenon that you see in every bureaucracy, whether it's government or it's business, where as the bureaucracy grows, as the organization grows, an increasing percentage of your human effort in that organization is devoted to watching the work happen, whether that's monitoring, whether that's physically watching it happen, whether that's auditing my administrative processes, auditing my finances, all the human resources processes to make sure that my interpersonal interactions are the way I want them to be. How much of that is actually doing the work of the organization? As the organization grows, a decreasing percentage is devoted to actually doing the work. And that creates this leadership imperative to say, hey, do we really need to have that bureaucratic growth? Do we really need to start that extra program? More is not necessarily better. And if you don't know that, if you don't have the experience to know that, you're going to have this impulse to create a new binder, to create a new program, to create a new process, and it can just be a time suck that pulls your supervisors away from what they really need to be doing.
I think it's a real natural challenge that is absolutely happening in organizations today of every shape and size. And it's really threefold when you think about it. So the nature of the bureaucracy as it grows, we need monitoring. We need to make sure we have adherence to things, the complexities basically of what happens as companies grow. But then there's the interpersonal that you mentioned about, hey, why are you micromanaging me? Like, what the heck? Well, if I don't, then maybe I'm going to be out. And so there's a real personal fear too among managers today who are saying, there's this tremendous pressure right now to flatten organizations and remove a layer of middle management or give up certain administrative and audit tasks to AI. And the managers are thinking, well, wait a second, like if I almost can't win if I'm doing my job, right? Then I'm micromanaging people potentially and looking for problems that may or may not exist. But if everything's going great and I'm super good at it, then there's not as much to talk about. Are people going to think that I'm not needed? When I'm actually orchestrating success into the system, it's challenging and it's not going to be solved anytime soon. But I think you're helping us understand that just the reality of the complexity of that situation, really at all the different levels. Which is pretty powerful when you think about it.
I would push back against the idea that anyone should ever try to protect their job security by hoarding responsibility, and I think that is just malfeasance at the highest level, because what you're doing, if anyone has that impulse, and it is a very natural impulse, the first thing that they should know is that it's transparent to everyone, you know, because especially higher level supervisors and executives know exactly what it looks like when a manager is hoarding responsibility. They've seen it their whole lives. They know what it looks like, and what that demonstrates if someone is refusing to delegate, refusing to push responsibility down to the appropriate level. What it demonstrates is that middle manager is more concerned about their own job security than they are what's best for the organization. And so that tells me that individual is not ready for something better, something higher, as opposed to someone who is confident enough in their own ability, confident enough in their own their own organization that they're pushing responsibility down, delegating appropriately, and accepting the risk that comes with that, accepting certain amounts of risk whenever I'm going to and there's ways to mitigate that. If I'm going to give a project to a junior officer and say, hey, I this you're going to do this, and you're going to turn this in on this day, and it's going to be good. I'm going to bake in internally some buffer on the deadline that I've given that person so that whenever it comes to me, and if it's a piece of meat, I can look at it and say, this is not what I told you to do, you know, and and there's going to be a different level of risk tolerance that I'm going to apply to the guy who's counting how many bags of flour I've got on board to the guy who is calibrating reactor instrumentation, and I'm going to accommodate that risk appropriately. But definitely it's very important that the managers are able to and demonstrate the ability to, because it is a skill and it is an acquired skill, the ability to delegate and the willingness to accept the risk that comes in that, because that's what tells me that person is ready for more responsibility. And if they're able to delegate everything and everything is smoothly running within their department and they're kind of able to kick their feet up, then that person is not going to kick their feet up. What they should do is now they walk around, now they talk to their individual people and say, hey, how's it going? How are the wife and kids?
Yeah.
Have you heard
It's
from home?
100%. Well,
And
I think that's really important too, is that I think in some organizations in the civilian sector, executives tend to look at middle management in some regard increasingly as overhead. And it's if the middle managers are only doing the technical non-value add bits, then I can kind of understand that. But I think in reality, we know that managers, level down leaders, I like to refer to us, play an instrumental role when it comes to the people side and the people systems. And I think the military gets this right more often than not. When you think about like an old adage, like chiefs run the Navy, for those who don't know, chiefs are the kind of the more senior of the enlisted. They're kind of the glue, if you will, between the top and the bottom of an organization. It's true in all branches. And I think that it really shows that there's a value added role up and down the ranks, not just, let's not just try to cut out the middle and pretend there's not going to be consequences. So I think it's going to be very interesting in the next, call it 5 to 10 years, to see how a rise in technology is really absorbed by organizations. And unfortunately, we're also seeing a situation where individual contributors are increasingly rejecting management roles. And they're deciding, I don't want to do it. It's too much stress. It's not a lot more money. I'd rather have work-life balance. We've kind of taken some of the privileged aspects of leadership out of those middle ranks. And then all of a sudden, that's going to cause a real developmental problem for the future leadership that we have in terms of capacity. So this is a really, really meaty topic for sure.
Yeah. I think you're just going to have to pay them more. We have this problem, and this is a tangent, but we keep acting baffled that we can't find people to weld to build ships. No one wants to weld. Yeah, it means you got to pay them a lot more. There are market forces at play. Anyway, that's not my area of expertise there.
Well, at this point, we've talked about some of the performance aspects of everything from zero defect environments and what it takes to operate, and have relatively young people, 20-year-old enlisted people in charge of, millions of dollars of equipment, and how we can make all that work. We've talked about the people and interpersonal dynamics. There's another one I like to talk about all the time, which is purpose. And I get this question a lot, and I'd love to pose it to you as well. Military service seems to be inherently purpose-driven. You're called to serve, you answer the call, however you want to talk about it. And so I guess my question for you is it true that box of purpose is just automatically checked for all the sailors under your command when you're on a submarine, or is there something more at play here?
Yeah, I think obviously not. I think you can never communicate too much why we're here and why we're doing what we're doing. But the key to this is sincerity. And if you're insincere in that communication, then they're going to detect that a mile away. And so you've got to really understand yourself why we're here, why we're doing what we're doing, and you've got to believe in it. And if you don't, then you probably shouldn't be there. You should probably seek a different line of work. And I think that applies in businesses as well. And if your business is a business that makes its money by exploiting little old ladies, then maybe you shouldn't be in that business, because you probably aren't going to believe in it, and you're probably not going to be a very effective leader, much less a very effective human. So a good example in the Navy and submarines is, a lot of our job is deterrence. I would say, the vast majority of our job is deterrence, where your job is to go out there and be ready to wage terrible war given the order. And if terrible war never happens, great, you did your job. And so there's a lot of opportunity there for individuals to say, yeah, well, nothing would happen if we weren't here. That's silly. And then I, as the leader, can say, you know what, I understand why you say that. I do understand why you might think that, but I promise I've been in a lot more smoky rooms than you have. I've been behind a lot more curtains. I've seen a lot more intelligence than you have, and I promise we need to be here. Here's what I can tell you. Here's why. Here's how the principles work. And, I can give a different lecture on your show on the merits of strategic deterrence, but I promise it's important.
Yeah, right. I like that a lot. Yeah, and I think that, for those of us in the civilian sector, it's not always glamorous, what we do, or, maybe we make widgets for some automotive, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I think still believing in it and still wanting to produce good work and support your customers and, have a great environment for your employees. There's lots of angles that you find to turn up the volume on that. It's one thing that when I made the shift from the Marines into civilian life, I didn't appreciate the fact that I had to work a little bit harder to maintain and kind of manifest that purpose in people, in my team members, because I had come from an environment where it was like, well, we all know why we're here. We're very intentional people. And I was like, oh, that's right. We have to kind of find something that we can all hold on to. And I think that was pretty interesting. But another part of the conversation we had recently too was talking about morale. And I have found your take on this fascinating. I wonder if you can expand on a little bit. And you had mentioned that, for example, if you're talking to a junior sailor, you say, hey, what's morale? And they might be like, well, if I'm happy, then my morale is high. You're like, that's not exactly what morale is. Can you give us a better definition, Will, of what morale is and how it relates to performance in the end of the day?
Yeah, I'm going to get heavy and philosophical for a second, because this is a very deep rabbit hole, but it's fascinating to me. So I'm just going to nerd out on it for a second. So morale, the word morale, you think, okay, what is the etymological root of this? Because that's, of course, what everyone thinks whenever they hear words. Well, it connects to this. It connects to morals and morality. Well, what are those two things? How do they connect? Well, we were just talking about purpose. They connect at the level of purpose, whether that is the purpose of an individual or the purpose of a organization. And so that I would say, because it's a organizational thing, that's one thing I've got to say about morale, is it's always a collective quality. Okay, an individual does not have morale. Okay, an organization has morale. A unit, a group has morale. All right, but morale is not just happiness of that group. No losing team has high morale. They might have something, if they look like they're happy, but they're failing in their purpose, then maybe they have something, but morale is not it. Okay, morale is inherently connected to your ability to achieve your design purpose of a group, and of what that unit or organization is supposed to do. So how does that connect to morality? Well, the first thing I'll say is no one ever wants to talk about morality. Okay, if I go to a bunch of sailors, a bunch of soldiers, or a bunch of anyone's, and I say, all right, gentlemen and ladies, I'm here to talk about morality, they're all gonna their eyes are gonna roll, and they say, like, I got all this as a kid. I don't want to hear this. Especially think a bunch of little soldiers and sailors. They're gonna think, man, I want to be tough. Tell me about how to be. I don't want to help little ladies across the street, and sharing is caring. I got all that as a kid. Tell me how to be disciplined. Tell me how to be industrious. Tell me how to be productive. Tell me how to be self-obedient. All those things are morality. And that's why it's fascinating. All those things that you want to be fearless. That's morality. That is what a human is supposed to be. And you've got it in your head, tough guy, that's what you're supposed to be, because it is. It's something that's inherent, and it's something that the ancient philosophers figured out thousands of years ago. All right, so how does that connect to morale? Well, it connects to the individual purpose of a human versus the individual purpose of a group. And an important thing about leaders is recognizing that leaders convert individual qualities to group qualities by being the example of what one is supposed to be. You notice this on board a ship, and I really saw this in vivid detail when I was once on an inspection team that I would go from ship to ship to ship, and we would basically put them in these simulated combat environments. And I would know as soon as I stepped on board that ship what the captain of that ship was going to be like, because the crew has a personality, and it's going to, inhere the personality of the captain to some degree in broad strokes. And so if I come on board the ship and the crew seems to be, they're not really forthcoming with things that are problems, and they seem to be they're hiding things, then I'm probably going to find at the top a captain who's preoccupied with his reputation. Or if the crew seems to be kind of victimized and defensive, and they're always worried about what the bad guy from outside of the ship is coming to impose, then the captain might be kind of a victimized personality of the type. But the point is that these personality traits echo through the organization in broad strokes. And this is just something that people have understood since ships were powered by oars. Like, this is just a human phenomenon. And so that's what leaders do, is they convert those individual qualities that map onto morality into collective qualities that map onto morale. So I hope that answers the question.
100%. I love this concept that, people don't have morale. They might be experiencing morale or not. That's a different thing. But they don't have morale, but organizations do. And I love this example. And I don't hesitate to go towards some of the more philosophical aspects of leadership, because I think I've learned enough at my advanced age to recognize how connected everything is. And so oftentimes when I talk about, everything from performance to people to purpose, people think of it as a ladder. It's actually a circle. These things are all interconnected, because when you leave off with that purpose, that philosophy, it actually heightens performance. It enhances performance for the reasons that you're describing for us. But I know that you know more than the average bear when it comes to philosophy. And in fact, you've written extensively about one particular philosophy, which is Stoicism, and within the context of military leadership in particular. And so I just wonder if you can tell us a little bit, Will, like, what is it that compelled you to write about Stoicism in the military context? And then how do you make it more practical and not just sort of an academic exercise?
Yeah. So some of your readers, I would say probably most of your listeners at this stage have probably heard of Stoicism, because it's kind of blowing up on the blogosphere. It's kind of exploded on the popular culture in the last few years. It's an ancient Greek philosophy. We don't need to get into what it's about. There's you can read on that forever, but at the very high level, it has to do with emotional control, being what you're supposed to be, and how you handle things that are outside of your control, which has just incredible ramifications in terms of leadership and organizational culture. So whenever Stoicism exploded onto the popular scene, I was kind of flummoxed. I was like, what, really? This has been around for 2,000 years and now you're discovering it? Okay. So, and then it occurs to me, well, maybe not everyone has read into this stuff. It's been a subculture in the military for a very long time, particularly at the Naval Academy where I went to college. So it's kind of an underground thing at the Naval Academy, and has been for many decades, owing to a particular kind of heroic admiral named Vice Admiral Stockdale, who was very, very deeply into it back in the 70s. And his writings have been all over the Naval Academy since his time, and that has kind of. So it's always been this kind of underground thing, and it's something that I got really into whenever I was there. And then so whenever it exploded onto the internet, I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, now suddenly everyone, when someone says like, I've been into Stoicism before, it was cool. I'm like, what are you, a vampire? Like, you but why I'd be compelled to explore this as a leadership tool and to write on it is really to set the record straight and kind of like get under the hood and say, okay, what does the book say? What is a nuclear submariner approach to this thing that, there's a lot of these very light and kind of surface and shallow takes on it everywhere. If someone is particularly interested in what is under the hood philosophically on this and how that applies, in my case, to military service and to military leadership. How can, especially rising military leaders extract value from these old philosophical ideas? That's what I wanted to capture in a book. And that's what I wrote on, is all those kinds of what's under the hood. What does the reference actually say on the concepts of war and leadership in the military? And so that's what the book that I wrote is about.
I think it's probably not surprising that Stoicism has entered into the popular press. And I think that there are many philosophies and views that can pertain to leadership. But I think that this notion of, whether it's the relative level of comfort, whether it's going back to some of these timeless principles, I feel like we're aching for something. We have this life today that's so highly technical, so manufactured, so pristine in some ways compared to what life was like 2,000 years ago. We kind of feel, maybe subconsciously, looking for some of those more timeless principles, like I said. So I feel like the military, of course, I find is always at the vanguard a little bit, trying to take some of these principles and ideas in there, always in this interesting position for people who haven't served. You're part of an organization that is steeped in tradition, so you're part of a lineage that goes all the way back. But at the same time, you're constantly pushing the envelope of what comes next in modern war fighting, whatever it might be. And it's a very interesting sort of position to be in. So you can draw those timeless principles and you can apply them to forward-looking strategy, et cetera, and tactics and maneuvers. So it's very cool. I'm very pleased that you had the opportunity to study both at the Naval Academy and at the Naval Postgrad College as well, and all kinds of great stuff. It's always fascinating to me. So you're welcome to come on the show and let's nerd out anytime you want. Well, I love this stuff for sure.
Yeah. Hey, one thing I will say is that in the discussion of why is it exploding now, and you were getting into the modern stressors, I think that it has to do with the mental health crisis. And I mean, I think we can all agree that there is a mental health crisis in not just this country, but all the advanced economies of the world right now. And there's a lot of statistics that I go into on all this, and a lot of literature on it. And the fascinating thing about Stoic philosophy is that if I send a sailor to the doctor to say, okay, your emotional health you need treatment. Well, what they're going to do, they're going to assess them very quickly, and more likely than not, they're not going to need drugs. They're probably not going to need antidepressants. They're probably going to need counseling. Most of the time, that is what is appropriate for most of the issues that are out there. And what therapy they're going to get is called cognitive behavioral therapy. Well, what is fascinating is that cognitive behavioral therapy was basically developed. It's not Stoicism. They're not just doing Stoicism, but it is an evidence-based approach that was developed by a small handful of psychologists in the 40s and 50s that were deeply read in the Stoics, and they based a lot of their therapeutic approaches on what the Stoics just thought was the way you should think about things, the way you should handle incident information and think about your emotions. And so it's kind of like it's not the same thing. One is an evidence-based approach, another is old philosophy, but it's more like it's kind of like natural cures. It's like we understood as human beings that you could cure a headache by chewing on the bark of a willow tree long before we knew that the active ingredient was salicylic acid, which could be synthesized as aspirin. We understood one thing before we understood another because it was just natural and it worked, and we figured it out just through trial and error. And that's kind of how these ancient philosophies work with respect to mental health. And so that there's an internally therapeutic aspect to it. It basically gives people the tools to perform therapy on themselves, which is what therapists do, is they teach you ways to think about things so that you don't need the therapist for your whole life, so that you can basically learn to accommodate all the stressors that you're dealing with. And do we want our military and do we want our leaders to have those tools? Absolutely we do. And that's kind of what I'm after there.
Yeah, it's so well said. And I love this idea of being able to apply Stoic philosophy and let's just say Stoic informed therapeutic practices, as needed. as a way to offset some of the mental stressors that we're experiencing, and it's not going to let up anytime soon. My prediction is that we're going to continue to be challenged until we change our lifestyle, until we change our relationships, and these types of things. Let's do something that's not going to help anyone at all, which is to have a fun trivia segment. Let's enjoy the conversation. It's just unbelievable, and we can keep things going here.
Man, I've been dreading this trivia segment since I've watched your other podcasts, and
So we have to embrace no fear. There's no wrong answer here. There's no wrong answer here unless it's the one we may just pick here in a second. Well, as you know, so we've got a segment here called Are We Smarter Than AI? You and I are a team. I don't know the question. I don't know the answers, but it is multiple choice, thankfully. And I figured we'd keep going with this theme of the Stoics. Here's our trivia question. Which of the following emotions did Stoic philosophy primarily advocate for eliminating or strongly moderating as a source of distress? Is it A, joy, B, anger, or C, amusement? We're going to go with B, anger. All right. So listeners, if you're playing along at home, again, we're looking for an emotion in Stoic philosophy to advocate for eliminating as a source of distress. We're going with, if it's A, joy, B, anger, or C, amusement, we're going with B, which is anger. And that is a great guess. The correct answer is indeed anger. B, you got it. Nailed it. Crushed it. Yep. Stoics believe that destructive emotions or passions like anger, fear, etc., were the result of faulty judgments and irrational beliefs. There you go. Yeah. Crushed it.
Since you asked, I am going to just nerd out on this for a second because I can't resist. All right. So anger, I get asked a lot, like, isn't it valuable sometimes to be angry? Like, wouldn't that make you better at, I don't know, fighting, or better at handling a situation that you should handle appropriately? Like, if someone is threatening my family or someone is threatening my organization, shouldn't I be angry about that? And I would say absolutely not. If I'm a prize fighter, and do I want to be the one that gets angry, or do I want to be the one that gets the other guy angry so that I can be cold and calculating and precise and kick his rear end? That is the way. So we want to be as cold and calculating, especially whenever we are facing danger or threats to ourselves or to our organization.
Love that. Early Stoics, more recently with emotional intelligence and self-regulation. It's all in there. And this is why, as leaders, you got to listen to Will. You got to listen to the philosophers of the day to be able to really rise to the heights of our leadership capacity and capability. But I can't thank you enough. I want to ask you one more really important question, though, Will. Where can my listeners go to learn more about you and about your amazing book?
Sure. So the name of the book is Stoicism as a Warrior Philosophy. It's available, wherever you get books. I do have a website, williamcspears.com. That's a weird thing for a naval officer to do, but it's apparently what you're supposed to do as an author. So I want to be an author, so as well as a naval officer. So I've got a website, and, I write a bunch of essays on other stuff that, military strategy and all those kinds of things too. And all that stuff's on there. But if, Matt, if we could just throw that stuff in the show notes too, I'd appreciate it.
100% will do. And listeners, just as Commander has just told us, we'll have those links for you in the show notes. You're only one click away from getting over and learning more about him and about his fabulous book. Commander, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot, Matt.
And to my leader listeners, thank you for investing in yourself, listening to this great information we got from Commander Spears and just all these great connections. You really do, in my opinion, need to apply yourself to learning the highest levels and practicing our craft and really studying it. If you got any takeaways from this episode, I'd love to hear from you. Hashtag Lead the People would be great on your socials. Or hit me up directly on LinkedIn. That's fine too. And if you've got an extra 30 seconds, please leave a 5-star rating on Spotify or wherever you're listening. Helps me attract great guests like the Commander and anybody else that you might be thinking of. And that's about it for today. So remember, as always, don't just manage the business when you can lead the people.